Right, how are you all set?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and we appreciate your patience this morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order. The time is now 9:02. And Stephanie, would you please take attendance?
Yes, thank you. Adrian Cochran will not be joining us today. Andrea Palmer, I don't believe has joined us yet. Ellen McKitterick,
Present.
John Scott will not be joining us today. Mike Soltis
Present.
and Holly Williams.
Present.
All right, at this moment, we do not have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. So we will table our review and approval of the November 22nd, 2024 meeting minutes. And we will open this meeting up to a discussion with regards to the frequency of meetings, Aaron, and then we'll table a vote on that until the next time we gather.
Right. So thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to just have this discussion. As you know, since we started 5 years ago, the meeting cadence has been on a monthly basis for both the board and the committee meetings. The board last week voted to maintain a monthly cadence for its meetings, but to allow each committee to decide for itself what cadence was appropriate. Particularly given sort of the very different functions of each committee and the very different obligations of each committee. So yesterday, for example, O&E decided that they rarely vote on issues. It's really an advisory opportunity for them. So they felt that they could meet on a bi-monthly cadence. I know at the board meeting, finance came up as a committee that has sort of ongoing responsibilities that often involve deadlines, including in particular the budget adoption process, but also just reviewing our regular financials. And then in light of the growth in our claims volume and kind of more frequent cadence of actuarial updates, finance definitely is a group that I feel like has timely obligations. But that being said, we are open. If the committee wants to meet less frequently, we will adapt and adjust and make sure you have whatever information you need. So it's really up to you as to what you would prefer.
Do any of the committee members this morning that are on with us have a preference they like to share? I have one that I did share in the broader board meeting, but I didn't know if anybody had any questions for Aaron or anything they wanted to share.
Well, I mean, I'll weigh in. While many of our meetings are short, I think watching the money is probably one of the most important functions of any committee. I mean, not to minimize any other committee's efforts. So if it were up to me, I'd prefer to continue doing them monthly. If there was a lot of opposition to that, I would think about some other options to ensure we have information about meaningful changes on those months when we're not meeting.
Right.
Yeah,
Ellen, I saw you come off mute.
not for questions, just to kind of generally agree with the rest of the group. I think that for even our monthly meetings aren't especially short in this group as compared to, say, like policy and personnel. I know both of you are on as well. Those can be very short if there's nothing to kind of review for that month. But I think, to Mike's point, it makes sense to keep maybe a little bit of a closer look on the finances month to month, especially as Aaron said, with the growth happening a little bit quicker than anticipated. And just with some of the presentations we've had lately showing kind of the impact of that growth and how just small things make a huge impact in like the 10-year projections or even the projections for closer. So I think it makes sense for finance to continue to meet monthly, even if other committees are kind of slowing their cadence and taking a little bit more time. It's just my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I will share that when Adrienne let us know that she was going to have to miss today, she did say that her preference was to meet monthly for finance. Just to pass that
Yeah.
along.
So I agree. I agree with my fellow board members. I think this one committee, it's very important for us to continue to meet monthly for transparency purposes as well, but also so that we can start to see things earlier rather than later should they creep in. And I think, you know, to the extent that we can kind of have more fruitful discussions by, you know, thinking about the agenda, we can try to do that as we move forward. I will try to do that as we move forward. I personally do think it's helpful when, you know, we look at the agenda and we can tell members, hey, you know, today is a short meeting if you need to plan accordingly on the back end, or hey, we'll try to the extent that we have more things, maybe we can think about when we put them on the agenda so we can have longer ones and shorter ones, just so people can manage their time. I know that was an issue that was brought up on the board meeting. And for the most part, we try, this one doesn't get canceled. So I think that concern with regards to late cancels was not an issue for us. But all right, so there seems to be consensus, but like I said, we'll table a formal vote until the balance of our colleagues have a chance to weigh in should they feel differently. And I guess we'll move forward. And we're going to have our actuarial update by the Spring Group.
So they're actually,
yes,
we'll just,
you. Okay.
Yeah. So for those of you who are at the board meeting, this will be a review, but we just wanted to make sure, because it's a lot and this is your area of cognizance, just wanted to kind of give you another opportunity to have a discussion. So why are you not letting me move forward? There we go. So just briefly, you know, the fund is solvent. The fund continues to meet its solvency metrics, but as we've been saying, higher than estimated claim volume means we spend more money, and therefore our balance is lower than budgeted. At this point, it's lower than budgeted by about 7 million. You know, some of the claim volume is changes are masked by the investment income still being greater than anticipated, which is lovely. We really appreciate that. But that is a function of actions taken by the Federal Reserve. And, you know, we don't necessarily anticipate, we don't feel comfortable assuming that our investment income will stay at the higher rates because because of things that are happening at the Reserve. So again, we ended the third quarter with a fund balance of 623 million, which, you know, obviously we've been paying benefits for several weeks now, so the balance is lower at this point in time. Just going to skip over this and talk about what that means in terms of updates. So we did ask Spring to do some updates and try to adjust what they project for the balance of fiscal year 2025. And so they did that with still recognizing that investments are a little bit better than we thought they would be. So there's, you know, a little bit of increase in our investment income, but we're still not assuming amazing returns. But we're assuming that our incurred claims are going to be about 22 million higher than originally estimated, with a little bit of difference in our OE because we continue to manage our own internal expenses really tightly. So that means that we expect to end the year with a fund balance at 645 instead of 663. But the real meat of what we asked Spring to do was to take this recent information and update their 10-year projections. The reason we needed to do that is because our claim volume continues to increase. And even in the last 6 months, it was 13% higher. So compared to where it was in the first 6 months. So if you look at the red dotted line, that was the trend line that we anticipated last winter. The blue dotted line is the updated trend line in terms of where we expect to be. So it's, as Ellen said, small changes can have a pretty big impact when you're talking about that kind of growth. So they did an updated projection, which included an updated estimates about take-up rates. Like how many people in the state of Connecticut do we expect to file claims? And with those updated take-up rates, we start anticipating that our income in terms of contributions may be lower than the net activity. We have the trust fund that we've built and protected, so we're not out of money by any stretch of the imagination, but we're going to start seeing some net losses we expect in the coming years. And so that's something that, even though we can currently pay for it, it's not a trend that we can just ignore. And so if we look at the projection, the baseline, which is sort of the graphical image of the slide I just showed you, is the green, which would put us at a fund balance at the end of 10 years of just under 300 million. If claims slow down, which is the blue line, then that's not something we have to worry about. If claims grow at an even faster rate than our twice now adjusted expectations, that's the yellow line. And if we have sort of the double hit of higher than estimated claims and lower than estimated contributions, that's the red line. Again, we do this in 10-year projections so that we have time to identify where things are going, adjust as need be, and make some plans. I don't think there's an emergency. I don't think we need to take emergency action, but we need to watch this pretty closely. Because everybody likes to say, oh, look, you have $600 million. That's a lot of money. And we're like, yeah, it is, except we pay a lot of money out too. And that's the exact conversation we had with a member of the press at yesterday's press conference, where we celebrated that we will reach the $1 billion benefit payment by the end of this year. And I will just, as an aside, one of the articles about the press coverage focused entirely on paid leave has a lot of money and contributions were up 3% this year, which is true. Those are both true facts. It was not a wrong article. It just omitted the whole claim side of the equation. It's like, okay, but we can't. We have to pay attention to that. And so when we looked at the formula that we developed last year, when we were trying to decide like what is an objective way to set the rate calculation and kind of just develop what we have been considering sort of our resiliency layer of funds, which is what we would want our target fund balance to be at the end of 10 years in order to be able to have that comfort that we could withstand sort of that double whammy of contributions going down and claims going up. We would want a fund balance of 740. We are projecting a fund balance of just under 300. So clearly we don't project ourselves to have that resiliency cushion that we would like. I think what's the most fascinating piece of information about this slide is if we could raise our rate to 0.54, we could get to that resiliency number. So 0.04% is really that difference, which just shows how delicate our balance is. Obviously, we don't have that ability, but I think it's an important factor to just show, it's a very delicate positive ratio that we have right now, and it could change, and small factors kind of have an outsized impact, which is why we like you guys to meet every month. So that's the sort of shortened, condensed version. I will stop sharing, but if anyone wants to see anything, and we did send this out to all of you, so you have it if you want to continue to look at it at your convenience.
So thank you, Erin, for that. Do any other board members have any questions or comments?
I just have one question. So, and I don't know, I guess call me a skeptic about long-term projections, right? And the longer they are, the more skeptical I am. But for example, our minimum wage, which affects our benefit, is linked to what? CPI, right? So in order to make the projection of what the benefit we're paying out is, one needs to make assumptions about CPI for the next 10 years, which makes assumptions based on the inflation rate and whether or not we have a recession, right?
Yes.
So some might say there's a lot of assumptions in there.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, it's the old joke about the economist would get off the deserted island by first assuming that there's a boat.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. I mean, that's the nature of their business.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can't argue with the numbers, but I take that with a grain of salt because of
yes.
all those assumptions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think it's important for us to be aware, right? I mean, spring is well established, well respected. Like, they're not drawing assumptions out of thin air, but yes, there are a lot of assumptions, and added to all of those are, which economists and actuaries are doing all the time, but then you add in the real uncertainty about paid leave, because there's not a lot of history in the States about paid leave. I personally believe that there was an attitude shift after the pandemic. So you see even the established programs kind of having to redo their assumptions because their calculations are all out of whack. So it is the word I want to use is volatile, even though that has a different context in Connecticut budget, but like, there's a lot of fluctuations that we have to take into consideration.
So
Yeah, who said there's a lot of known unknowns and then some unknown unknowns, right?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
I guess I have a question, Erin. So like assumptions aside, your comment about it being, kind of volatile and our lack of flexibility in increasing our rate to address some of that volatility if we were to want to do that. I guess my question would be, does your team currently, or are they kind of thinking about efforts to, I think Molly mentioned in the full board meeting that we're the only state that has a specific cap on our rate rather than kind of a cap that can be adjusted. So is there some thought that even if the desire is not to change a cap and keep it like a specific cap, that a cap would be set with more flexibility in it? And does your team kind of have efforts that they're making or plan to make with the legislature to talk about that?
So, yeah, so Molly made the point that the 0.5% is the lowest rate and the lowest cap. So it's not only that
Right.
it's the lowest current rate, it's the lowest cap. There are some states that have caps, but they're like over what? I can't remember. They're over 1%. So
Mhm.
there's definitely, other states have more flexibility. We do not have any current legislative plans to advocate for changing the cap. That's something that we wouldn't do as staff without bringing it to the board first. I think part of what we want to do is continue to educate the legislature about the fund, and the way that our funding mechanism works and the impact of that low cap. But because it's a part-time legislature, right? Like, so last year, all they knew was we were projected to have far too much money, according to certain folks who wanted to reduce our contribution
Right.
rate. So it's this year we're just trying to like educate, I think, before we can say, please change, because it's the way we are funded and the way that we have to budget is just so different than traditional state budgeting that there's kind of a big learning curve to kind of say, please take off your regular mindset. Like, we do not zero out at the end of the year. Because that is the expectation for everybody else. So that's kind of our goal this year, unless the board feels that we need to be ramping up those efforts. It just feels a little bit premature. Going back to Mike's point, there's a lot of assumptions.
Mhm.
So I want to act quickly, but not precipitously.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I completely understand that the idea is like premature, and I'm not advocating for like a specific change. It's just a question about whether we have the flexibility at the time we want to have the flexibility, if that makes sense. But thank you. I just,
Yeah. I think that's part of the goal of education. Look at the tools we don't have. These are helpful tools.
right.
I think kind of bringing together what Mike was saying and what you were saying, Ellen, is that the plan as designed, the program as designed has limited levers absent legislative intervention for us to materially shift the financial landscape of the health of the program, should we need to, because and that is something that is a real thing to be aware of, because the legislative session has a beginning and an end in the absence of a special session, and it politicizes the conversation. So I think we have a controlling force there. And then on the other side, I think, to your point, Mike, I think one of the things that has always struck me in what the actuaries have done is not necessarily all of the assumptions and the validity of the assumptions, but how sensitive the trend lines are with really small changes in claims. And I think I've said this before in meetings, but I think we always expected that we'd go back, right? Back to normal when COVID's done. You know, I remember telling my kids, when it's done, we'll have a big party or something, but it doesn't really, it seems that you don't really get to the done part, right? And so I think you also don't really get back to the normal part. So then the question is like, what kind of lies ahead for the plan and human behavior and choices and things like that. So I think, you know, being conservative and, you know, looking at that sensitivity analysis and being mindful at how limited our levers are that we can push and pull on in a short time frame are all things that are good to be mindful of. So I think we keep having these conversations as the plan matures, and then the plan itself will kind of, I think, start to tell its own story and drive us in the right direction. But, well, Aaron, I didn't have any other comments. Did any of my colleagues? No. All right. So I appreciate that update. So we're now on to you, Dave, and you're going to take us through our spending projections.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. So we're going to go over the results for November, as well as projections through the end of the year. Not 10 years out, Mike. So
Yeah.
the crystal ball is a little clearer, but if it was 100% all the time, I'd be using it to predict winning lottery numbers, amongst other things. So having said that, let's talk about what we do know, which was November. All right.
See your screen, Dave.
Thank you for the verification, Stephanie. So for the month of November, we'll start with our operating results, as we always do. Our net activity for the month was just over negative $1.4 million. That did result in a positive variance of $215,000. If you did peruse the financial statements before the meeting, you'll see that there are negative variances for payroll. That is a timing difference, because what happened was there were 3 payrolls in the month of November, and we were off by a day when we were budgeting. So we thought the 3 payrolls would happen in December. So this negative variance will correct itself next month. Having said that, we still did have a positive variance for the month of November, and the significant expenses were the typical ones. We had payroll and related expenses of $1,031,000. Again, that's 3 payrolls, so if that sounds higher than usual, that's why. Our license expense was $229,000. That was for our annual Salesforce license, which actually that came in lower than expected, actually. We were able to get some new things that resulted in a lower annual expense overall. So my thanks to the IT team for that. Our contact center expense was almost $129,000. Our outreach expense was $100,000. So that made up the bulk of the $1.5 million for the month. Year to date, our net activity is just under $4.6 million, with a positive variance of just under $2 million through November. And so that's what's happening with our operating account. With our bond account, we spent a little over $121,000 for the month on custom solutions to our fund recovery system, slightly over what we budgeted for the month. And year to date, we've spent over $521,000 on our fund recovery custom solutions. And so also year to date, we also just happen to be just over $21,000 in the negative. But we still think we'll be around the $1.2 million for the budget that we've established. We do have $1.8 million remaining in bond funds. So if perchance we do go over the 1.2 we budgeted, we do have over $600,000 in bond funds available to us to use. Moving on to contribution activity, our net activity for the month was over a negative $42.2 million. That resulted in a negative variance of just under $6.5 million. As we've been telling you earlier at this meeting and for the prior months, the biggest driver of that variance, over $7.5 million, has been the benefits that we've been paying out. The good news is that people are using the program and aware of the program, which is what we want. So for the month of November, we paid out over $43.6 million. We did reimburse Aflac for 5 weeks, so that's why the number is higher than it typically is for a given month. On average per week, that amount was $8.7 million a week. So that number does continue to grow. On the contribution side, relatively speaking, slow month, $464,000, just under $149,000 of a positive variance. Also a positive variance for our fund recovery efforts, more than we budgeted. Those continue to go well. And also our investment income had a positive variance of $506,000. As Erin mentioned, the investment rate that we are earning in the STIF account is tied to what the Fed fund rate is. It was the rate we earned on the STIF this month was 4.8%. And as you may be aware, the Fed's lowered their rate by 25 basis points this week. So we do expect the investment rate to go down to somewhere about 4.5% in December and January. Having said that, that is still higher than the rate we budgeted at 4%. So if the rate stays there, we'll be ahead of budget. Again, I don't know what the Feds are going to do for the next 6 months. So we'll see what happens and we'll monitor that. But for now, we expect to be ahead of the game in terms of investment income. As far as year-to-date activity, we're at over $33.8 million. That is $21.8 million lower than what we budgeted. And again, the main driver is the benefits paid being more than what we budgeted, being somewhat offset by our contribution revenue and our investment income. Our contribution fund at the end of the month of November was just under $600 million. Like Erin mentioned before, we are solvent and we do have the funds to pay out benefits. What that means for the balance sheet is, our total assets are over just under $622 million. And again, our largest asset does continue to be the short-term investment fund account. And other assets continue to be money we have at Aflac for the impressed account, the net value of our fixed assets, and money that we have unused for the bond funds as well as the operating funds. The liabilities continue to be the money that we do owe the state for the bond funds we borrowed at just about $12.8 million, and we'll be making our next payment for that at the end of the fiscal year in June of 2025. Projections for where we'll be at the end of this fiscal year for operations, we expect to be at $5.8 million. That is $3.9 million better than what we budgeted. The main drivers of that positive variance, similar to what I said last month, payroll and related expenses are a main driver of that. the pension rate in particular, it came in at 12% lower than what we had budgeted, which is not typical, but that certainly does result in less expenses for the authority. Our IT and consultant expense is also another significant driver of the better than budgeted variance. We're using mostly bond funds now to pay for the IT consultant expense because most of what we're spending for the IT consultants is for our fund recovery custom solutions, and those qualify for bond money. So we're going to use the bond money first. Other positive variances include software expense. As I mentioned, we got some savings in our Salesforce annual expense, about $100,000 of that. And also, we're not going to have to spend as much money for a fund recovery license this year due to the custom solutions we have. Other savings include the contingency of $250,000, which we don't expect to use. Our outreach efforts, as you may be aware, we have a community education coordinator initiative we have this year. We have budgeted for 12 organizations to partner with, and as of now, we have 7. So we're rolling out with those 7, and so that results in less expenses for outreach and for legal expense as well, because we didn't have to set up contracts with 12 organizations. We only had to set them up with 7. So all those reasons are why we have a positive variance in operations and expect to be better than what we budgeted by the end of the year. For contributions, we expect to be at about $8.4 million by the end of the year. That's on a cash basis, so that number is somewhat slightly different than what you see presented from Spring, because they're on an accrual basis or an incurred basis. Since we are on a cash basis, the fund balance is expected to be $575 million by the end of the fiscal year. Again, that will lead us to be in a solvent place by the end of the fiscal year. So not too many concerns there. And again, the main driver of why the net amount is lower than what we budgeted was the less than expected benefit, was the higher than expected benefits that we budgeted for about 8 or 9 months ago. That amount is somewhat offset by higher contributions that we expect to bring in than what we budgeted, as well as higher fund recovery and higher investment income, as well as less spending on benefit administrative fees than we had budgeted. So that's what's going on with us fiscally year to date through November, as well as what we expect through the end of the fiscal year. I'm happy to take any questions at this time if anybody has them.
I don't see any.
No.
No questions? All right. Thank you, Dave, for bringing us through that. Is there any old business? Any new business?
No.
All right, so we will end the meeting today at 9:41 a.m. I hope everybody has happy and healthy rest of 2024 and a good new year.
Thank you, everyone. We
you,
appreciate
Holly.
your
Thank
Bye,
time.
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Have
Thanks.
a good day.
Bye.
Thanks again, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Happy holidays.